She admitted to being a virgin in the elevator, and the boss couldn't focus on work anymore. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She shouldn't have trusted her heart to speak the truth, but she did. The morning rain painted Seattle's skyline in soft grey watercolors, and the 42nd floor of Nexus Digital Innovation buzzed with its usual Monday energy. Coffee machines hummed, keyboards clicked in rhythm, and somewhere in the distance, a printer spat out quarterly reports with mechanical precision. Julian Atwood stood at his corner office window, watching the city wake up below. At 35, he commanded respect without asking for it. His charcoal suit fit like armor, his dark hair was perfectly styled, and his steel blue eyes missed nothing. He was the kind of man who made million-dollar decisions before breakfast and never second-guessed himself. Never. Until this morning. "Mr. Atwood?" The voice was soft, musical, and instantly recognizable. He didn't need to turn around to know it belonged to Amara Ellison. "The Peterson account files you requested," she said, stepping into his office with the grace of someone who belonged in elegant spaces but had earned her place through pure competence. Julian turned, and for the 1,000th time in 3 months, he felt his carefully constructed composure falter. Amara was 26, with warm brown skin that seemed to glow from within, and natural curls that framed her face like a crown. She wore a navy blazer over a cream silk blouse, professional yet feminine, and when she smiled, which she did often, it transformed the entire room. "Thank you," he managed, accepting the files. Their fingers brushed for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "How's the Morrison project coming along?" "Ahead of schedule," she replied with quiet confidence. "The client loved our revised timeline, and the team is already implementing Phase 2. Of course they were. Amara had that effect on people. She made them want to exceed expectations, to be better than they thought possible. In 3 months as the administrative coordinator for the innovation department, she'd streamlined processes that had been broken for years, mediated conflicts between departments with diplomatic finesse, and somehow made everyone feel valued, including him, especially him. "Excellent work," Julian said, his voice more formal than he intended. "That's all for now." But she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with those intelligent dark eyes. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Atwood? You seem tired." The concern in her voice was genuine, unguarded. When was the last time someone had asked him that question and actually cared about the answer? "I'm fine," he lied smoothly. "Just a long weekend reviewing the quarterly projections." She nodded, but he could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, if you need anything, I'll be at my desk until 6. After she left, Julian tried to focus on the Peterson files. Instead, he found himself remembering the way she'd looked when she laughed at Friday's team meeting, head thrown back, eyes sparkling, completely unself-conscious. The way she'd defended the intern when Davies had been unnecessarily harsh, her voice firm but respectful. The way she'd stayed late to help the cleaning crew when one of them had hurt her back, never thinking anyone would notice. He'd noticed everything. The elevator ride down to the parking garage at 5:30 was supposed to be routine. Julian had taken this same elevator thousands of times, usually alone, lost in thoughts about market projections or acquisition strategies. Today, Amara stepped in on the 38th floor. "Good evening, Mr. Atwood," she said, pressing the button for the main lobby. "Amara." He nodded, taking in her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked tired but content, the kind of fatigue that came from meaningful work well done. Between the 32nd and 31st floors, the elevator shuddered and stopped. The lights flickered once, twice, then settled into emergency mode, a soft amber glow that made the small space feel intimate rather than confined. "Power fluctuation," Julian said automatically, checking his phone. "Should be resolved in a few minutes." Amara leaned against the wall, seemingly unbothered. "I don't mind. Sometimes it's nice to have a moment to just breathe." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. In the amber light, she looked younger, more vulnerable than her usual polished professional self. "Long day?" he asked. "Good day," she corrected with a smile. "Productive. Sometimes I can't believe this is actually my job, you know? Working with brilliant people, contributing to something meaningful." She paused, then laughed softly. "Sorry, I probably sound naive." "You sound passionate," he said. "That's rarer than you might think." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged with possibility. Julian found himself studying the way the emergency lighting caught the copper highlights in her hair, the gentle curve of her neck, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. "Can I ask you something?" Amara said suddenly. "Of course." She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "Do you ever feel like everyone expects you to have all the answers? To be this perfect, untouchable version of yourself?" The question caught him off guard. "Where is that coming from? I was talking to my friend Kelsey yesterday, and she was telling me about her dating disasters. All these guys who either want to fix her or put her on some impossible pedestal." Amara's fingers played with the strap of her purse, a nervous gesture he'd noticed she did when she was thinking deeply. "She asked me why I never date, and I realized I don't know how to be anything other than completely honest, even when it might scare people away." "Honesty is a strength, not a weakness," Julian said quietly. "Is it?" She met his gaze directly. "Even when the truth makes you seem inexperienced? Different?" There was something in her voice, a quality he couldn't quite identify. Vulnerability mixed with defiance, as if she was daring herself to speak words that terrified her. "What kind of truth?" he heard himself ask. Amara took a deep breath, her cheeks warming with color that had nothing to do with the elevator's lighting. I've dated, but I've never actually—" She stopped, shook her head. "God, why is this so hard to say?" Julian's pulse quickened. "Take your time. I'm 26 years old," she said in a rush, "and I've never been with anyone. Really been with anyone. I'm still—" Another breath. "I'm still a virgin." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. His mind went completely blank, then exploded with 1,000 thoughts at once. She's never been touched, never been kissed properly, never had someone worship her the way she deserves. The elevator hummed back to life, jerking slightly as it resumed its descent. 31st floor, 30th, 29th. Amara was staring at her shoes, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I can't believe I just said that to my boss. Please forget Amara." His voice came out rougher than intended. She looked up, startled by the intensity in his tone. The elevator dinged softly as they reached the lobby. The doors slid open to reveal the bustling atrium, people heading home after another day, the world continuing as if nothing monumental had just happened in the space between floors. But Julian couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think about anything except the woman standing 3 feet away from him, looking mortified and beautiful, and utterly unaware of how completely she'd just altered his universe. "Mr. Atwood?" Amara's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you getting off?" And in that moment, Julian Atwood realized that some confessions change everything, and there was no going back. He built his empire on precision, but she made him forget his own name. Julian Atwood had never missed a meeting in 15 years. Today he missed 3. The morning after the elevator incident found him sitting in his executive chair at 6:47 a.m., staring at quarterly reports that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit. Numbers blurred together, profit margins became meaningless symbols, and every time he tried to focus on revenue projections, his mind conjured the memory of Amara's voice saying those words. "I'm still a virgin." The confession replayed in his head like a song stuck on repeat, each iteration more devastating than the last. The way she'd blushed, the courage it had taken for her to speak that truth, the absolute trust she'd placed in him by sharing something so intimate, and the way his entire body had responded to the knowledge that no man had ever touched her. "Mr. Atwood?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Julian blinked, checking his watch. 9:55 a.m. How had 3 hours disappeared? "Cancel it," he said. Silence. Then, "Sir, this is the quarterly review with—" "I said cancel it, Rebecca. Reschedule for tomorrow." He clicked off the intercom and pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. This was insane. He was Julian Atwood. He closed billion-dollar deals before lunch, gave presentations to Fortune 500 CEOs without breaking a sweat, and had built Nexus Digital from a garage startup into a tech empire through sheer force of will and flawless execution. He did not get distracted by women, especially not women who worked for him, especially not women who— A soft knock on his door interrupted the thought. Julian straightened his tie, composed his expression, and called out, "Come in." Amara stepped into his office carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a concerned expression. She'd chosen a burgundy dress today that hugged her curves without being inappropriate, paired with a black blazer that made her look both professional and stunning. "Rebecca mentioned you cancelled the board meeting," she said, setting the coffee on his desk. "I thought you might need this." It's that Colombian blend you like. The simple gesture, her remembering how he took his coffee, caring enough to bring it personally, hit him harder than it should have. Thank you, he managed, accepting the cup. Their fingers didn't touch this time, but he was hyper-aware of how close she stood, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way the morning light from his windows made her skin glow. Are you feeling all right? She asked. And there it was again, that genuine concern that seemed to strip away all his carefully constructed defenses. I look what? The question came out sharper than intended. Amara studied his face with those perceptive dark eyes. Tired, distracted, like you have something weighing on your mind. He thought desperately. You're weighing on my mind and I can't make it stop. Instead, he said, just a complex acquisition we're considering. Nothing that concerns you. It was a dismissal, and they both knew it. But instead of backing down, Amara tilted her head slightly, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as her thinking face. You know, she said slowly, yesterday in the elevator, I shared something pretty personal with you. Something I've never told anyone at work. She paused. Maybe it would help if you talked about whatever's bothering you. Sometimes an outside perspective can clarify things. Julian nearly laughed at the irony. She was offering to help him work through a problem that she had created simply by existing, simply by being honest, simply by trusting him with her truth. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, but this isn't something I can discuss with an employee? She finished the sentence with a slight smile. Or with someone who apparently overshares in confined spaces. The reference to yesterday's confession made Julian's pulse spike. Was she thinking about it too? Did she regret telling him? Was she embarrassed? I don't think you overshared, he said quietly. No? She looked genuinely curious. Because I've been replaying that conversation in my head all night, wondering if I made you uncomfortable. Uncomfortable wasn't even close to what she'd made him feel. You were honest, Julian said. That's rare. Rare and potentially career-limiting, Amara replied with a self-deprecating laugh. I can't believe I told my CEO that I'm... She stopped, color rising in her cheeks again. That you're what? Julian asked, his voice dropping lower without permission. You know what I said. Her voice was barely above a whisper now, but there was something in her tone that hadn't been there yesterday. A thread of awareness, of acknowledgement that something had shifted between them in that elevator. The air in his office suddenly felt thick, charged with the same energy that had crackled between them in that confined space. Julian found himself standing, moving closer to where she stood near his desk, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't name or control. Amara, he said, and her name felt different on his lips now, weighted with new meaning. She looked up at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, filled with possibilities and questions, and the growing realization that whatever was happening between them was bigger than either of them had anticipated. Julian's phone rang, shrill and intrusive. The spell broke, and Amara stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place. I should let you get that, she said, but her breathing was slightly uneven. The Henderson presentation is at 2. Do you need me to review the slides? No, Julian said, ignoring his still ringing phone. That is, yes, review them. But Amara... She paused at his door, looking back expectantly. What you told me yesterday, I want you to know that it doesn't change how I see you professionally. You're brilliant at your job. Something flickered across her expression. Disappointment? Relief? Before he could analyze it, she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Atwood. That means a lot. After she left, Julian finally answered his phone, but he couldn't concentrate on the call. His mind kept circling back to that moment, when she'd stood close enough to touch, when the careful professional boundaries between them had wavered and nearly fallen. This was dangerous territory. She worked for him. She trusted him. She was young, inexperienced, and deserved someone who could offer her the kind of relationship she'd never had, not someone like him, older, cynical, with enough emotional baggage to sink a ship. But as the afternoon wore on, as he found himself checking the time and calculating when she'd walk past his office, as he caught himself listening for her voice in the hallway, Julian began to realize something that terrified him. For the first time in his adult life, what he wanted and what was wise were two completely different things, and he was no longer certain which one would win. The phone rang again, but Julian's eyes were fixed on his door, waiting for a woman who was about to turn his perfectly ordered world upside down. Some conversations happen without words, and those are the most dangerous ones of all. Thursday morning arrived with Seattle's typical drizzle, and Amara Ellison stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her emerald green blouse for the third time. She told herself the extra care in her appearance had nothing to do with a certain CEO's steel blue eyes, but her reflection wasn't buying the lie. 3 days had passed since the elevator confession, and the air between her and Julian Atwood had become electric with unspoken possibilities. Every professional interaction carried an undercurrent of awareness that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. She was 26 years old, had graduated summa cum laude from University of Washington, and could coordinate complex projects with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. She was not some inexperienced girl who lost her head over an attractive boss, except she absolutely was, and she was finding it impossible to care. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different now, charged with memory and anticipation. Amara found herself wondering if Julian would be there, if they'd share another moment of unexpected honesty, if the careful professional distance between them would crack a little more. "Good morning, Amara." Her colleague David Chen, no relation to the forbidden Chen, greeted her with his usual enthusiasm as she settled at her desk. "You're glowing today. New skincare routine." "Just got a good night's sleep," she replied, powering up her computer and trying not to glance toward Julian's corner office. "Speaking of glowing, have you noticed Mr. Atwood seems different lately?" David lowered his voice conspiratorially. "More distracted. Rebecca says he's been missing meetings, and yesterday he approved the Henderson budget without even reading it. Mr. Perfectionist himself." Amara's fingers stilled on her keyboard. "Maybe he's just dealing with something personal." "Julian Atwood doesn't have a personal life," David laughed. "The man's married to this company. I heard from Michelle in accounting that he hasn't taken a vacation in 4 years. Before Amara could respond, a familiar voice cut through the morning chatter. "Miss Ellison, could I see you in my office?" Julian stood in his doorway, impeccable as always in a navy suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. But Amara noticed the subtle signs David had missed, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his fingers tapped against the doorframe, the controlled set of his jaw. "Of course, Mr. Atwood." She grabbed her tablet and followed him, hyper-aware of David's curious gaze tracking their movement. Julian's office smelled like expensive cologne and rain-dampened windows. He closed the door behind them, something he'd never done before, and gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "The Morrison Project," he began, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "I need you to coordinate with their legal team for the final contract review." "Already handled," Amara replied smoothly. "I scheduled the call for this afternoon and prepared the documentation they requested. The summary is in your email." Julian nodded, but he didn't look at his computer. Instead, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're incredibly efficient," he said quietly. "I try to anticipate needs," she replied, and immediately regretted the choice of words when she saw something flicker in his eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them could say. Amara found herself studying the way morning light caught the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his hands moved restlessly on his desk, the way he seemed to be fighting some internal battle. "Is there something else you needed?" she asked softly. Julian stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked Elliott Bay. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Make everything seem so—" He paused, his reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. "Uncomplicated." Amara rose from her chair, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "You think my life is uncomplicated?" He turned to face her, and she was surprised by the raw honesty in his expression. "You seem to know exactly who you are, what you want. You don't second-guess yourself." "You're wrong about that," she said, taking a step closer. "I second-guess myself constantly, especially lately." "About what?" The question hung in the air between them. Amara felt herself standing at a crossroads, knowing that her answer would either maintain the careful professional distance they'd been pretending to maintain, or shatter it completely. "About whether some risks are worth taking," she said. Julian went very still. "Amara, about whether honesty is always the right choice, even when it changes everything. You need to be careful." His voice was strained, warning. "About what?" She moved closer, close enough to see the conflict playing out in his eyes. "About being honest. About acknowledging that something happened in that elevator. About admitting that we both feel it. About trusting the wrong person with that honesty." The words were meant to create distance, but his voice betrayed him, rough with want and careful control. "Are you the wrong person, Julian?" Hearing his name on her lips seemed to undo something in him. His professional mask slipped, revealing the man underneath, intense, conflicted, and completely focused on her. "I'm your boss," he said, but he didn't step away. "Is that all you are? I'm 15 years older than you." "And? I'm not." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. "I'm not the kind of man who does relationships, Amara. I work. I build companies. I don't do romance or fairy tales or whatever it is you deserve." "What makes you think you know what I deserve?" The question seemed to surprise him. "You're young, brilliant, beautiful. You should be with someone who can give you everything. Someone who can be your first everything." Heat flooded Amara's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Maybe I don't want fairy tales. Maybe I want something real. You don't know what you want, don't I?" She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I may be inexperienced, Julian, but I'm not naive. I know exactly what I want. Amara." Her name was a plea, a warning, a prayer. "I want someone who sees me, really sees me. Someone who makes me feel brave enough to tell the truth even when it scares me." She paused, her heart pounding. "Someone who loses sleep thinking about me the way I lose sleep thinking about him." Julian's composure cracked. "You have no idea what you do to me." "Then tell me." For a moment she thought he would. His hand lifted as if he might touch her face, and she saw everything he wasn't saying written in his expression. Then his phone rang, and the spell shattered. Julian stepped back sharply, the professional mask slamming back into place. "You should go. This conversation never happened." Amara felt the dismissal like a physical blow, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how much it hurt. "Of course, Mr. Atwood. Is there anything else you need?" "No." His voice was cold now, distant. "That's all." She walked to the door with measured steps, her hand on the handle when his voice stopped her. "Amara?" She turned, hope fluttering in her chest. "Wear something blue tomorrow," he said quietly. "It brings out your eyes." And with those words, Julian Atwood proved that some battles are lost the moment you realize you're fighting them. When a powerful man makes a request, it's rarely about the color of a dress. Amara Ellison owned exactly 3 blue dresses. She'd stood in her walk-in closet for 20 minutes Friday morning, analyzing each option like a military strategist. The navy sheath was too formal, the powder blue sundress too casual, but the cobalt wrap dress, silk, elegant with a neckline that suggested rather than revealed, that one made her feel powerful. And if Julian Atwood wanted blue, she'd give him blue that would haunt his dreams. The morning commute felt different. Amara caught her reflection in the elevator's polished walls and saw a woman who'd made a choice. Not the eager-to-please employee she'd been 4 days ago, but someone who understood the game they were playing and intended to win. The 42nd floor buzzed with Friday energy, but Amara's focus narrowed to a single point, the corner office where Julian would either acknowledge what was building between them or continue pretending they lived in a world where chemistry obeyed corporate policies. "Holy wow," David whispered as she passed his desk. "Is there some client meeting I don't know about? Because you look like you could negotiate world peace in that dress." "Just felt like wearing blue today," she replied, settling into her chair with deliberate grace. At exactly 9:15, Julian emerged from his office. Amara felt his gaze find her immediately, felt the moment he registered the dress, felt his steps falter almost imperceptibly before he continued toward the conference room. But not before she caught the flash of something fierce and hungry in his expression. Good, she thought. Let him see what he's trying to resist. The morning crawled by with agonizing normalcy. Emails, phone calls, project updates, all the mundane tasks that usually consumed her attention felt like performance art. She was hyper-aware of every movement, every breath, every glance toward Julian's office. At 11:30, her computer chimed with an internal message. From Julian Atwood to Amara Ellison. Subject: lunch meeting. I need you to attend the client lunch at Aqua today, 12:30. Wear your coat. It's supposed to rain. Amara stared at the message, her pulse quickening. Aqua was one of Seattle's most elegant restaurants, perched high above the Sound with panoramic water views. It was also where Julian took his most important clients, the ones worth impressing. She typed back quickly, "Which client? Should I prepare specific materials?" His response came immediately, "Just bring yourself. And Amara, thank you for wearing blue." The words hit her like lightning, professional on the surface, but underneath, acknowledgement, appreciation, and something that felt dangerously close to an invitation. Aqua's maitre d' recognized Julian immediately, leading them to a corner table with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Elliott Bay in all its storm-tossed glory. Rain streaked the glass like tears, and the sound stretched endlessly grey beneath heavy clouds. "Mr. Atwood," the server approached with practiced deference, "your usual table. Will the rest of your party be joining you shortly?" "Actually," Julian said, pulling out Amara's chair himself, "it's just the two of us today." Amara's breath caught. There was no client, no business meeting, just Julian, her, and a restaurant that screamed romantic rather than professional. Julian. His name slipped out before she could stop it. No Mr. Atwood formality to hide behind. "I know what you're thinking," he said, settling across from her. "This isn't appropriate. I shouldn't have brought you here. I should have more self-control." "Should have," Amara noted, "but didn't." "No." His smile was rueful, resigned. "Apparently my self-control has limits, and you found them." The server returned with menus and wine suggestions, but Amara barely heard the words. She was too busy studying the man across from her, Julian, without his armor of conference rooms and corporate protocols. His suit was still immaculate, but something in his posture was different, looser, more human. "Why here?" she asked when they were alone again. "Because my office has glass walls, and I needed somewhere we could talk without the entire company watching." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "And because you deserve better than stolen moments between meetings." "Talk about what?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the white tablecloth. "About the fact that I can't concentrate on anything but you, about how I've been lying to myself for 3 months, pretending you're just another employee when the truth is—" He stopped, shook his head. "The truth is terrifying. Tell me anyway." "The truth is that you walk into a room and everything else fades. The truth is that I've built my entire life around control, and 5 minutes with you makes me want to abandon every principle I have." His voice dropped lower. "The truth is that when you told me you'd never been touched, my first thought wasn't that you're too young or inexperienced. It was that I wanted to be the one, the only one." Heat flooded Amara's cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "And what's wrong with that?" "Everything." Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm your boss, I'm older, I have no business wanting—" "What do you want?" she interrupted. The question hung between them like a challenge. Around them the restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and clinking silverware, but their table felt isolated, suspended in its own bubble of possibility. "I want to take you home," Julian said quietly. "I want to cook dinner for you and listen to you talk about your dreams. I want to show you what it feels like to be treasured by someone who sees exactly who you are." His hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "I want to be your first everything, and that makes me selfish as hell." Amara's heart was racing, but her voice was steady. "What if I want that too? You don't understand what you're asking for." "Don't I?" She leaned forward, her voice soft but fierce. "I'm asking for honesty. I'm asking for someone to stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I'm asking you to stop deciding what I can handle and let me choose for myself." Julian's composure was cracking, piece by careful piece. "If we do this, there's no going back. Once I touch you, once I—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I won't be able to pretend anymore." "Good," Amara said simply. "I'm tired of pretending too." The server approached with wine, and the moment shattered into careful politeness and discussion of the lunch menu. But underneath the social nicety, something fundamental had shifted. Lines had been crossed, truths had been spoken, and the careful distance they'd maintained was crumbling. As they shared calamari and talked about everything except what really mattered, Amara watched Julian fight his internal war. She saw the moment his resolve began to fracture, saw the exact second he stopped trying to be noble and started planning surrender. "Come home with me tonight," he said, as they waited for the check, his voice so low she almost missed it. "Julian, just to talk, to figure out what this is without an audience." His eyes met hers, and she saw everything he wasn't saying. "I promise I won't. I won't push for anything you're not ready for." Amara smiled, a slow, knowing curve of lips that made his breath catch. "What if I'm ready for more than you think?" And in that moment, Julian Atwood realized that some women don't need protection. They need someone brave enough to match their fire. Some evenings change the entire trajectory of 2 lives, and this was one of them. Julian Atwood's penthouse overlooked Seattle like a fortress of glass and steel, perched 43 floors above the city's glittering heartbeat. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living space, offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains, and a sunset that painted the sky in shades of amber and rose gold. Amara stood at those windows now, still wearing the blue dress that had started everything, her reflection ghost-like against the evening sky. Behind her, Julian moved through his kitchen with surprising grace, preparing dinner with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. "This is beautiful," she said, watching a ferry glide across the Sound like a lit jewel against the darkening water. "I bought it for the view," Julian replied, his voice carrying from the open kitchen. "Sometimes I stand there for hours, just watching the city breathe. Lonely way to spend an evening." I thought so too. He appeared beside her with 2 glasses of wine, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. Until tonight. The wine was perfect, a burgundy that tasted like silk and secrets. Amara took a sip, hyper-aware of how the simple act of drinking felt different here, in his space, with the weight of unspoken promises hanging between them. "Tell me something I don't know about you," she said. Julian smiled, the expression transforming his face from austere authority to something younger, more approachable. "What makes you think there's anything you don't know?" Because Julian Atwood, the CEO, is a carefully constructed image, but Julian, the man who notices when his employees need encouragement, who remembers how people take their coffee, who asks a woman to wear blue because it brings out her eyes. She turned to face him fully. "That man is much more interesting. You see too much. Or you don't show enough." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I wanted to be a chef when I was younger." The admission surprised her. "Really? My grandmother taught me to cook when I spent summers with her in Tuscany. She said food was love made tangible." Julian's expression grew distant, nostalgic. "I used to dream about opening a small restaurant, nothing fancy. Just a place where people could come and feel cared for." "What changed?" "My father died when I was 23. Heart attack. I inherited his tech company, 50 employees depending on me, and suddenly dreams felt like luxuries I couldn't afford." He sipped his wine, the gesture buying him time. "I told myself I'd go back to cooking someday. 20 years later, I realized someday is a lie we tell ourselves to make sacrifice bearable." Amara set down her glass and moved closer, close enough to see the silver threading through his dark hair, close enough to count the lines around his eyes that spoke of too many late nights and careful control. "Cook for me," she said simply. "What?" "Right now. Cook for me the way you would have in that dream restaurant." Something shifted in Julian's expression, surprise giving way to something deeper, more vulnerable. "You really want that?" "I want to see who you are when you're not being the CEO. I want to meet the man who dreamed of feeding people's souls." What happened next was a revelation. Julian moved through his kitchen like a dancer, confident and fluid in a way that had nothing to do with corporate authority. He talked as he worked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, telling her stories about his grandmother's garden, about learning to make pasta from scratch at 8 years old, about the way certain spices could transport you across oceans. Amara perched on a bar stool, watching his hands, elegant, capable hands that built empires and now julienned vegetables with artist precision. There was something deeply intimate about watching him cook, about seeing this hidden facet of a man who showed the world only strength and calculation. "Taste," he said, appearing at her elbow with a spoon of something that smelled like heaven. She opened her mouth without thinking, and he fed her the sauce, rich, complex, with layers of flavor that bloomed on her tongue. But more intoxicating than the food was the way he watched her reaction, the way his eyes darkened when she closed hers and made a soft sound of appreciation. "That's incredible," she breathed. "My grandmother's secret recipe. She said it was the first thing she cooked for my grandfather the night he proposed. Smart woman. If someone cooked this for me, I'd probably say yes to anything." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Julian went very still, the spoon forgotten in his hand. "Tell me something," Amara said, breaking the moment with gentle curiosity. "What made you become so guarded about relationships?" Julian was quiet for a moment, considering. "Claire," he said finally. "We dated for 2 years. She loved the CEO lifestyle, but hated the CEO workload reality. Charity galas were glamorous, but late-night conference calls with Tokyo were not. She left me for a venture capitalist who kept banker's hours." "Her loss," Amara said simply. "I thought so too, until I met you and realized I'd never actually been in love before." His voice dropped. "Claire wanted to be with a successful man. You want to be with me." "There's a difference," Amara agreed softly, then smiled. "Though I have to warn you, my 3 older brothers are going to hate you on principle. They scared away every boy who looked at me sideways in high school." Smart brothers, Julian murmured, moving closer. Can't wait to meet them. You say that now, she laughed. Wait until Marcus starts the intimidation speech. Anything? Julian asked quietly, returning to her earlier comment. Amara met his gaze directly, unflinching. Try me. He set down the spoon and moved toward her, slow and deliberate. When he reached the bar stool, he placed his hands on either side of her, caging her in without touching. This is your last chance, he said, his voice rough. Once this line gets crossed, there's no pretending we're just boss and employee. No taking it back. I don't want to take it back. You don't know what you're saying. Stop. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, over his racing heart. Stop deciding what I know or don't know. Stop protecting me from my own choices. I'm 26 years old, Julian. I'm not a child. You're innocent. Innocent isn't the same as naive. Her other hand joined the first, both palms flat against his chest. I know exactly what I'm asking for. I know what I want. What do you want? The question was barely a whisper. I want you to stop fighting this. I want you to stop thinking and start feeling. She looked up at him, her dark eyes fierce and certain. I want you to kiss me like you've been imagining since that elevator. Julian's control snapped. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing the high curves of her cheekbones. For a heartbeat, they stayed frozen like that, on the precipice of everything. Then his mouth found hers. The kiss was nothing like what Amara had imagined. It wasn't gentle or tentative or careful. It was hungry and desperate and full of 3 months of suppressed longing. Julian kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, like she was salvation, and he'd given up hope of finding it. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Amara, he said her name like a prayer, like a question, like a promise. Don't you dare apologize, she whispered against his lips. I was going to say we should eat dinner before it burns. She laughed, the sound bright and joyous in the intimate space between them, practical even in the middle of seduction. Is that what this is? Seduction? If you have to ask, you're not very good at it. Julian's smile was slow, wicked, and completely devastating. Challenge accepted. And as Seattle's lights began to twinkle beyond the windows, 2 people stood in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and possibility, finally brave enough to reach for what they've been wanting all along. Some lessons can't be taught with words. They require trust, patience, and the courage to be completely vulnerable. Dinner was a symphony of stolen glances and accidental touches. Julian had prepared osso buco with saffron risotto, the kind of meal that belonged in Michelin-starred restaurants rather than private penthouses. But Amara barely tasted the food. She was too busy watching the man across from her transform. Gone was the controlled CEO who measured every word. In his place sat someone warmer, more open, who talked with his hands and laughed at her stories about growing up with 3 older brothers in Tacoma. The wine helped, but it was more than alcohol softening the edges between them. It was possibility, finally acknowledged and embraced. Tell me about your first day at Nexus, Julian said, refilling her wine glass. You really want to know? Everything. Amara smiled, remembering. I was terrified. I'd researched you, obviously. The wunderkind CEO who built an empire before 30. I expected someone intimidating and cold. And instead, you were intimidating, she admitted, but not cold. You spent 20 minutes explaining the company culture, asked about my background like it actually mattered, and when I mentioned I was nervous about the learning curve, you said, smart people ask questions. Stupid people pretend they already know everything, Julian finished. I remember. That's when I knew I wanted to work here, not because of the salary or the prestige, but because you made me feel like my thoughts had value. Something shifted in Julian's expression. You have no idea how extraordinary you are, do you? Heat crept up Amara's neck. I'm just brilliant, compassionate, strong enough to call me on my bullshit when I'm being an ass. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And beautiful enough to stop my heart every time you walk into a room. The air between them grew thick with awareness. Amara set down her fork, appetite forgotten. Julian, I know we should take this slow, he said quietly. I know I should be a gentleman about this. But I've been dreaming about touching you for months, and now that I can... He stood, moving around the table until he was beside her chair. Now that I can, I'm not sure how much patience I actually have. Amara looked up at him, her pulse racing. Then don't be patient. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing across her bottom lip. You don't know what you're asking for. I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I'm asking you to touch me like you want me. Julian's composure cracked. His other hand joined the first, cradling her face like she was something precious and fragile despite her words. "I do want you," he whispered, "more than I've ever wanted anything." "Then show me." He pulled her to her feet slowly, giving her time to change her mind, time to step away. Instead, she moved closer, her hands settling on his chest. Amara. Her name was a question and a prayer. "I trust you," she said simply. The words undid him completely. Julian kissed her again, but this time it was different. Deeper, hungrier, but also reverent. His hands tangled in her hair, and she could feel him trembling with the effort of holding back. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. He led her through the penthouse to his bedroom, a space that was masculine and elegant, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city lights below. But Amara barely noticed the decor. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, on the way he was looking at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe. "We can stop," Julian said, his voice rough. "Anytime you want, we can stop." "I don't want to stop." She turned to face him fully. "But I need you to understand something. I may not have experience, but I'm not afraid. I've been waiting for this, for you, without even knowing it." Julian's hands framed her face again, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Amara reached for the buttons of his shirt. Her fingers weren't entirely steady, but her determination was absolute. Julian caught her hands, stilling them. "Let me." What followed was a masterclass in patience and worship. Julian undressed her slowly, reverently, pressing kisses to each inch of skin he revealed. When she stood before him, in only moonlight and shadows, he looked at her like she was art, like she was everything beautiful in the world. "You're perfect," he breathed. "Your turn," she whispered, but when she reached for his shirt again, he caught her hands. "This is about you tonight," he said, "about making sure your first time is everything it should be. What if I want it to be about us?" "Amara," his voice was strained, "if you keep saying things like that, I'm going to lose what little control I have left." She smiled, slow and knowing. "Good. I want you out of control. I want you to stop thinking and start feeling. You're going to be the death of me," he muttered, but he was smiling as he said it. What happened next was unlike anything Amara had imagined. Julian touched her like she was precious, kissed her like she was air, and when he finally made her completely his, it was with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets, skin against skin, heartbeats slowly returning to normal. Julian traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch soft and wondering. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Different," Amara said truthfully, "but good different, complete different." "Any regrets?" She turned in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight streaming through the windows. "Only one." Julian tensed. "What?" "That we waited so long." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "That was worth waiting 26 years for." "My brothers always said I was too picky," she admitted quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. 3 older brothers who insisted no guy was good enough for their baby sister. "Smart brothers," Julian murmured against her hair. "They were right to be protective." "They're going to hate you," Amara said with a soft laugh. "Dating their sister is one thing. Dating their sister and being her boss. Marcus might actually try to fight you." "I can handle myself," Julian replied with confidence. "Besides, once they see how much I love you, you think you can charm your way past 3 overprotective brothers? I built a tech empire from nothing. How hard can it be?" The relief in his expression was profound. "I was terrified I'd hurt you. You didn't hurt me. You cherished me. There's a difference." Julian pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I meant what I said earlier, about this changing everything. I can't go back to pretending you're just my employee." "Good," Amara murmured against his chest, "because I can't go back to pretending I don't love you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Julian went very still beneath her. "Amara, I know it's too soon to say that. I know it complicates everything." She lifted her head to meet his gaze. "But it's the truth, and I told you I was always going to be honest with you." Julian stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "I love you too," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day when you called my conference room intimidating but inspiring." And as Seattle slept below them, 2 souls who had found their match lay wrapped in each other's arms, finally understanding that some risks are worth everything. Love in the boardroom is a different game entirely, and the stakes just got higher. Amara woke to the scent of espresso and the sound of rain against floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, she lay still in Julian's king-sized bed, wrapped in sheets that smelled like expensive cologne and the memory of last night. Seattle's grey morning light filtered through the glass, casting everything in soft silver, and she could hear Julian moving quietly in the kitchen. The realization hit her like warm honey. She was in love, completely and irreversibly, with her boss. Yesterday, that fact would have terrified her. Today, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning, beautiful." Julian appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee, wearing nothing but black boxer shorts, and a smile that made her pulse quicken all over again. "Good morning." She sat up, unconsciously holding the sheet to her chest, then caught herself. After last night, modesty seemed silly. Julian noticed the gesture, and the moment she abandoned it, his eyes darkened appreciatively as he crossed the room. "Sleep well?" he asked, settling beside her on the bed. "Better than I have in months." She accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "This smells incredible. Italian roast. My one weakness besides you." The casual way he said it, like loving her was already a settled fact, made warmth bloom in her chest. "What time is it?" she asked. 7:30. "We have time." Julian's hand found her bare thigh under the sheet, his touch casual and possessive, in a way that sent heat spiraling through her. "Time for what?" "To figure out how we handle this at work. To talk about what happens Monday morning when we walk into that office." Reality crashed over Amara like cold water. In the bubble of last night, she'd forgotten about corporate policies, about the professional implications, about the fact that 50 people would be watching their every interaction. "Julian," she set down her coffee with suddenly unsteady hands. "What are we going to do?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're the CEO and I'm—" She gestured helplessly. "This could destroy both our careers. The gossip, the assumptions about how I got promoted, about whether any of my achievements are real." Julian's expression darkened. "Anyone who questions your competence will answer to me. You can't fight my battles for me. That would make everything worse." Amara pushed her hair back, anxiety creeping in. "Maybe we should keep this private, at least until—" "Until what?" "Until we figure out if this is real or just incredible chemistry." Julian went very still. "Is that what you think this is, chemistry?" "I don't know what to think." The confession tumbled out before she could stop it. "Last night was perfect, but in the light of day, Julian, you could have any woman you want. Sophisticated, experienced women who know how to navigate this world. What if you wake up in a few weeks and realize you made a mistake?" Julian set down his coffee and turned to face her fully, his expression intense. "Look at me," he said quietly. She did, and found herself drowning in those steel blue eyes. "I didn't make a mistake. Last night wasn't just chemistry, and this isn't some midlife crisis fantasy." His hand cupped her face gently. "I love you, Amara. Not the idea of you, not the novelty of you, but you. Your brilliant mind, your fierce heart, the way you make me want to be better than I am." Tears pricked her eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've spent 35 years building walls around my heart, and you tore them down without even trying. Because when I picture my future, you're in every single moment of it." He pressed his forehead against hers. "Because I've never said those words to another woman, and I never will again." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, made something inside Amara settle and bloom. "Never?" she asked softly. "In 35 years? I thought I was in love before. I was wrong." Julian's thumb stroked across her cheek. "Claire wanted the lifestyle, the status. She never wanted to know who I was when I wasn't being the successful CEO." "What are you when you're not being the CEO?" Julian smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "A man who dreams about cooking in small Italian kitchens, who reads philosophy books and terrible spy novels, who's been alone so long he forgot what it felt like to want to share his life with someone. And now I can't imagine a morning without you in it." "I love you too," she whispered. "I'm just scared." "Of what?" "Of losing myself in this. Of people thinking I'm just another executive's arm candy. Of disappointing you when the newness wears off." Julian was quiet for a moment, stroking her cheek with his thumb. "What if we made a deal?" he said finally. "What kind of deal?" "At work, nothing changes. We're professional, appropriate, maybe even a little distant to avoid suspicion. But here, in private, we're completely honest. About everything. Our fears, our needs, our doubts." Amara considered this. "And if it becomes too difficult? Pretending during the day? Then we'll figure it out." together. Julian smiled. But I have a feeling you're stronger than you think, and I know you're too proud to let anyone question your abilities. He was right. The thought of colleagues whispering that she'd slept her way to success made her spine stiffen with determination. Okay, she said. We try it your way. Our way, Julian corrected. This is a partnership now. The word partnership sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with attraction. Partnership implied equality, respect, shared decision-making. It implied a future. I should go home, Amara said reluctantly. Get changed. Maintain plausible deniability. Das, Julian said, his voice dropping to that low register that made her shiver. You could shower here. I have a very impressive shower. Julian, but she was already smiling. Completely practical suggestion. I'll even be a gentleman and let you shower alone. What if I don't want you to be a gentleman? The look he gave her could have melted steel. Then we're going to be very late for work. An hour later, Amara stood in Julian's marble-walled shower, letting scalding water wash away the last of her doubts. Through the frosted glass, she could see Julian's silhouette as he shaved at the bathroom sink, and the domestic intimacy of it made her chest tight with emotion. This was real. Whatever challenges they faced, whatever complications arose, this feeling between them was real and worth fighting for. Amara, Julian's voice carried over the sound of water. Yeah? When this gets difficult, and it will get difficult, remember last night. Remember how right this feels. I will. She turned off the water and reached for a towel. Julian? Yeah? When you start second-guessing yourself, and you will, remember that I chose this. I chose you. And I don't make decisions lightly. Through the frosted glass, she saw him smile. And as Seattle's Monday morning traffic began to build below them, two people prepared to face the world with a secret that felt less like a burden and more like a promise. The hardest role to play is pretending not to love someone when they're right in front of you. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's trademark drizzle and the weight of unspoken secrets. Amara stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her charcoal blazer for the third time. She'd chosen her most professional outfit, tailored pants, crisp white shirt, minimal jewelry, armor for a day that would test every ounce of her composure. The weekend had been a revelation. Lazy mornings in Julian's kitchen, walks through Pike Place Market where he'd bought her peonies and kissed her behind a flower stall. Quiet evenings on his couch where they'd talked about everything and nothing. For 48 hours, they'd existed in a bubble where titles and hierarchies didn't matter. Now she had to walk into Nexus Digital and pretend her world hadn't shifted on its axis. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Remember what we talked about. Professional distance, but know that I'll be thinking about you every second. Despite her nerves, Amara smiled. Another message followed immediately. Also, you look beautiful this morning. I saw you leave your building from my car. Heat flooded her cheeks. He'd been watching her apartment. The possessiveness of it should have annoyed her, but instead it sent warmth spiraling through her chest. She typed back, Stalker. See you at the office, Mr. Atwood. Can't wait, Ms. Ellison. The 42nd floor of Nexus Digital buzzed with typical Monday energy. Coffee brewing, keyboards clicking, the low hum of productivity beginning another week. Amara settled at her desk with practiced efficiency, checking emails and reviewing her schedule as if this were any other Monday, as if she hadn't spent the weekend falling completely, irrevocably in love with her CEO. Morning, superstar. David's voice cut through her concentration. How was your weekend? You look different. Amara's pulse spiked. Different how? I don't know. Glowy? Like you got really good sleep or ate an amazing meal or... He squinted at her. Did you get a facial? Your skin looks incredible. Just a relaxing weekend, she replied, hoping her voice sounded normal. Caught up on sleep. Lucky you. I spent mine dealing with my sister's wedding drama. Apparently, the florist double-booked and... Good morning. Julian's voice cut through David's story like a blade. Both Amara and David looked up to find the CEO standing beside their workstation, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that made his eyes look impossibly blue. His expression was perfectly neutral, professional, but Amara caught the brief moment when his gaze lingered on her face. Mr. Atwood, she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Good morning. Ms. Ellison, I need you to review the Henderson contracts and prepare a summary for the 10 o'clock meeting. His tone was crisp, businesslike. David, marketing wants to discuss the Q4 campaigns with you. Of course, Amara replied, reaching for her notepad. Any specific areas you'd like me to focus on? The liability clauses. Make sure everything aligns with our revised policies. Julian's hand brushed against her shoulder as he reached across her desk for a file. The contact so brief, it could have been accidental, but Amara felt it like electricity, a spark that traveled from that point of contact straight to her core. I'll have it ready in an hour, she managed. Excellent. Julian straightened, his professional mask firmly in place. David, marketing is waiting for you in conference room B. After David hurried away, Julian lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. Ms. Ellison, he said quietly, his voice carrying a note only she would recognize. Excellent work on the Morrison project last week. Your attention to detail was impressive. The subtext in his words, the memory of her attention to very different details, made heat pool in her stomach. Thank you, sir. I'm glad my performance met your expectations. Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The word performance had clearly hit its mark. It exceeded them, he said, his voice rough around the edges, substantially. Then he was gone, striding toward his office with the controlled power that had first attracted her attention months ago. Amara watched him go, her pulse racing from their carefully coded exchange. This was going to be torture. The morning crawled by in a haze of stolen glances and professional interactions that carried dangerous undercurrents. Every time Julian passed her desk, every time their eyes met across the conference room during the Henderson meeting, the air between them crackled with suppressed energy. Amara threw herself into work with fierce concentration, but part of her mind remained hyper-focused on Julian, the way he moved, the cadence of his voice during meetings, the brief moment when their hands brushed as they reached for the same document. Are you okay? Michelle from accounting asked during lunch break. You seem distracted. Just focused on work, Amara replied, stabbing her salad with more force than necessary. If you say so. But you keep staring at the CEO's office like it holds the secrets of the universe. Panic fluttered in Amara's chest. If Michelle had noticed, how many others had too? I'm waiting for feedback on a project, she lied smoothly. You know how Mr. Atwood is about deadlines. Michelle didn't look entirely convinced, but she dropped the subject. When Amara returned to her desk, David appeared with a knowing smile and 2 cups of coffee. So, he said, settling into the chair beside her workstation. You and the boss man? Amara nearly choked on her first sip. What? Relax. I'm not blind, and honestly, I think it's great. You two make sense. David's expression was warm, genuine. Plus, he's been less of a perfectionist tyrant since you started working closely with him. David, your secret's safe with me, he assured her. But you might want to work on the heart eyes during meetings. Rebecca's already suspicious, and she's not as friendly as I am. Amara felt a wave of gratitude toward her colleague. Thank you. Just promise me you'll invite me to the wedding. David winked. I want to say I saw it coming from day one. At 3:30, Amara's computer chimed with an internal message. From Julian Atwood. To Amara Ellison. Subject, document review. I need you to review the Patterson contracts in my office. Please bring your notes from this morning's meeting. Her pulse quickened. There were no Patterson contracts. This was a summons, not a business request. Amara gathered her notepad and walked toward Julian's office, hyper-aware of curious glances from colleagues. The glass walls of his office meant their meeting would be completely visible, adding another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Close the door, Julian said as she entered. Should I? People will notice. I don't care. His voice was strained, and when she looked at him properly, she saw the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands were clenched on his desk. I can't do this, Amara. Do what? Pretend you're just another employee. Pretend I don't want to kiss you every time you walk past my office. Pretend I didn't spend my entire weekend falling more in love with you than I thought possible. The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight. Julian, we agreed. I know what we agreed. And I'm trying. But watching you today, being so close but having to maintain this distance, he ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. It's killing me. Amara moved closer to his desk, lowering her voice. It's killing me, too. But we have to be smart about this. One day at a time, remember? I want to touch you so badly I can't think straight. The confession sent heat spiraling through her. Julian, I know we can't. But I needed to tell you. Needed you to know that every professional interaction we've had today has been an act. His eyes met hers, burning with intensity. The only real thing in this office is how I feel about you. Before Amara could respond, a knock on the glass door interrupted them. They both turned to see Rebecca approaching with a stack of files. "Come in," Julian called, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "The Patterson contracts you requested," Rebecca said, placing the files on his desk. She glanced between Julian and Amara with barely concealed curiosity. "Miss Ellison, I didn't realize you were working on the Patterson account." "Mr. Atwood asked me to review the liability clauses," Amara replied smoothly. "Fresh eyes on the project." "Of course." Rebecca's smile was pleasant but calculating. "Well, I'll leave you to it." After she left, Julian and Amara stared at each other across his desk, both acutely aware of how close they'd come to exposure. "We need to be more careful," Amara said quietly. "I know." Julian's voice was resignation and frustration in equal measure. I'm not good at pretending, Amara. I've never had to hide something that matters this much." "We'll figure it out," she said, echoing his words from that morning. "But right now I should go. Rebecca's already suspicious." "Wait." Julian's hand moved across his desk, stopping just short of touching hers. "Tonight, come over tonight. I need to hold you. Need to remember that this is real." The vulnerability in his voice undid her completely. "Okay, but I should probably wait until after 8. Make it look casual. Nothing about how I feel about you is casual." "I know." Amara's smile was soft, understanding. "But the rest of the world doesn't need to know that yet." As she walked back to her desk, Amara was acutely aware of the careful dance they were now required to perform. Professional by day, lovers by night, with the constant tension of keeping their two worlds separate. But as challenging as it was, as exhausting as the pretense felt, there was something thrilling about their secret. Something that made every stolen glance, every carefully coded conversation, feel electric with possibility. And as the Seattle skyline began to darken beyond the office windows, two people counted the minutes until they could stop pretending and simply be themselves again. In corporate America, rumors travel faster than truth, and sometimes they're exactly right. 3 weeks into their carefully orchestrated charade, the whispers had grown too loud to ignore. Amara stood at her desk Thursday afternoon, organizing files with mechanical precision while her mind raced. The office felt different today, charged with the kind of energy that preceded a storm. Conversations stopped when she passed. Glances lingered longer than they should. Even David, usually oblivious to office politics, had asked if she was okay 3 times since lunch. Something was brewing, and she had a sinking feeling she knew what it was. Her computer chimed with an internal message from Julian. "My office. Now. Bring the Morrison files." There were no Morrison files anymore. That project had been completed weeks ago. This was code for "we need to talk and we need to talk now." Amara gathered her notepad and walked toward Julian's corner office, hyper-aware of curious eyes tracking her movement. Rebecca looked up from her desk as she passed, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Another special project?" Rebecca asked with artificial sweetness. "Just a quick review," Amara replied, keeping her voice neutral. Julian's office door was already closed, unusual for a Thursday afternoon. She knocked and entered to find him standing at his windows, hands clasped behind his back, tension radiating from every line of his body. "Close the door," he said without turning around. "Julian, what's—" "Brad Cooper cornered me in the parking garage this morning." His voice was flat, controlled. "Apparently the executive team has been hearing interesting stories about us." Ice flooded Amara's veins. "What kind of stories?" Julian turned to face her, his expression grim. "That I've been showing you unusual favoritism, that your rapid involvement in high-profile projects seems convenient, that maybe there are non-professional reasons for my interest in your career development." The euphemisms hit like physical blows. "They think I'm sleeping my way to success. They think we're sleeping together, which we are." Julian's smile was bitter. "The problem is proving that it started after your professional advancement, not before." Amara sank into the chair across from his desk, her mind reeling. "What did you tell Brad?" "I told him that your performance speaks for itself, that any suggestion of impropriety is insulting to both of us." Julian moved to his desk, bracing his hands on the surface. But he wasn't buying it. "He's calling an informal meeting with the board tomorrow morning to discuss concerns about company culture and professional boundaries." "An informal meeting," Amara repeated. "That sounds ominous." "It is. Informal means they can ask whatever they want, without HR protocols. It means they can make suggestions about personnel changes without official documentation." Personnel changes. The blood drained from her face. You mean firing me. I mean transferring you. Or suggesting you might be happier at another company. Corporate speak, for making your life so uncomfortable you leave voluntarily. Amara was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. 3 months ago, she'd been a respected administrative coordinator with a sterling reputation. Now she was the subject of office gossip and executive scrutiny, all because she'd fallen in love with the wrong man. Except he wasn't the wrong man. He was perfect for her, and that was the problem. Maybe they're right, she said quietly. Julian's head snapped up. What? Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we should have kept our distance. She met his eyes, her voice gaining strength. Maybe I should transfer to another department, make this whole thing go away. Is that what you want? Julian's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the pain in his eyes. I want a lot of things. I want to be respected for my work. I want to advance based on my abilities. I want to love you without it destroying my career. Her laugh was hollow. Apparently I can't have all three. Julian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. What if you could? What do you mean? What if we stopped hiding? What if we went to that meeting tomorrow and told them the truth? Amara stared at him. You want to confess to the board that we're in a relationship? I want to make it clear that we're in a relationship that began 3 weeks ago, well after every professional decision involving you had already been made. Julian's voice grew stronger, more confident. I want to show them documentation of your performance reviews, your project contributions, your innovative solutions that have saved this company money and improved efficiency. And if they don't care about documentation, if they've already made up their minds, then we deal with the consequences, together. Julian moved around his desk until he was standing in front of her. But I'm not going to let them destroy your reputation with whispers and innuendo. Not when I can prove how extraordinary you are. The certainty in his voice made something in Amara's chest loosen and bloom. You really think that would work? I think Brad Cooper is a smart businessman who cares more about company performance than office gossip. I think the board values results over rumors. Julian's smile was sharp, confident. And I think they're about to learn exactly how valuable you are to this company. Amara studied his face. The determination there, the absolute confidence in her abilities, the love that saw her as an equal rather than someone who needed protection. Are you sure about this? Because once we go public, there's no taking it back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Julian's voice dropped to that low register that made her pulse quicken. I love you, Amara. I'm tired of hiding it, and I'm sure as hell not going to let anyone make you feel ashamed of loving me back. Outside the office windows, Seattle's late afternoon light painted the sound in shades of gold and silver. Tomorrow would bring challenges neither of them could fully predict, but for the first time in weeks, Amara felt ready to face them. Okay, she said simply. Let's do this. Julian's smile was brilliant, transformative. Together? Together. As they began planning their strategy, as Julian pulled up performance reviews and project files that would document her contributions, Amara realized something that made her chest tight with emotion. This wasn't just about defending their relationship. It was about Julian believing in her enough to bet his own reputation on her abilities. It was about partnership, in the truest sense. Two people choosing to face the world as equals, ready to fight for what they'd built together. And as Seattle's evening lights began to twinkle beyond the office windows, two people prepared to prove that some loves are worth every risk, especially when you know exactly how much you're worth fighting for. Some battles are won not with weapons, but with the courage to stand in your truth. Friday morning arrived with crisp October air and the weight of destiny. Amara stood in front of her bedroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., adjusting the navy blazer she'd chosen for what might be the most important meeting of her professional life. She looked polished, competent, unshakable, exactly the image she needed to project when facing down a room full of executives who questioned her worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. You've got this, remember who you are. Another message followed immediately. I love you. Win or lose, nothing changes that. Amara smiled despite her nerves. 3 months ago, Julian Atwood had been an intimidating CEO she admired from afar. Now he was her partner in every sense of the word, ready to stand beside her against whatever came next. The 42nd floor of Nexus Digital felt different that morning, electric with anticipation. Word had somehow leaked about the informal meeting, and Amara could feel curious glances tracking her movement as she settled at her desk with deliberate calm. You okay? David asked, appearing at her workstation with coffee and concern. You look like you're preparing for battle. Maybe I am, Amara replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Whatever's going on, you know the whole department is rooting for you, right? You're the best coordinator we've ever had. The simple statement of support made her chest tight with emotion. Thank you, that means more than you know. At exactly 9 a.m., Julian emerged from his office wearing his most authoritative charcoal suit and an expression of absolute confidence. Their eyes met across the bustling floor, and he nodded almost imperceptibly. It was time. The executive conference room on the 45th floor was intimidatingly elegant. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Seattle's morning skyline. 5 board members were already seated when Julian and Amara arrived. Brad Cooper, Margaret Thornton, James Liu, Patricia Rodriguez, and Robert Kim. Brad Cooper looked up as they entered, his expression neutral but calculating. Julian, Ms. Ellison. His slight pause before her name spoke volumes. Thank you both for coming. Of course, Julian replied, pulling out a chair for Amara before taking his own seat. The gesture was protective, respectful, and entirely public, a clear statement about how he saw their dynamic. I'll be direct, Brad began, opening a folder in front of him. This company has always prided itself on maintaining the highest professional standards. Recently, there have been concerns raised about potential irregularities in certain personnel decisions. Amara kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened. Here it comes. Specifically, Margaret Thornton added, her voice crisp with disapproval. Questions have been raised about Ms. Ellison's rapid advancement through high-profile projects and whether those assignments were based purely on merit. The euphemism hung in the air like smoke. Amara felt every instinct telling her to shrink, to apologize, to make herself smaller. Instead, she lifted her chin and met Margaret's gaze directly. I'd be happy to address those concerns, she said calmly. What specific questions do you have about my performance? James Liu leaned forward, consulting his notes. In the past 3 months, you've been involved in the Henderson project, the Morrison account and the Patterson acquisition. That's an unusual level of responsibility for someone in your position. It is, Amara agreed. I was fortunate to have opportunities to demonstrate my capabilities beyond my initial job description. Fortunate? Patricia Rodriguez repeated with a slight smile. Or well-connected. The implication was crystal clear. Amara felt Julian tense beside her, but she placed a subtle hand on his arm, a signal that she could handle this herself. Ms. Rodriguez, could you be more specific about what you're suggesting? I want to make sure I address your concerns accurately. I'm suggesting, Patricia said, her voice sharpening, that your involvement in these projects may have been influenced by factors other than professional qualifications, such as? The direct question seemed to catch Patricia off guard. The room fell silent, tension crackling between the walls. Brad Cooper cleared his throat. Miss Ellison, are you currently in a personal relationship with Mr. Atwood? The question she'd been expecting, delivered with surgical precision. Amara looked around the table, meeting each board member's gaze before answering. Yes, she said simply. I am. The admission sent ripples through the room. Margaret Thornton looked triumphant. James Liu made a note on his pad. Patricia Rodriguez sat back with satisfaction. I see, Brad said carefully. And when did this relationship begin? 3 weeks ago, Julian answered, his voice steady and clear. October 7th, to be precise. Robert Kim spoke for the first time. And you expect us to believe that this relationship had no influence on Miss Ellison's career advancement? I don't expect you to believe anything, Amara said, reaching for the portfolio she'd brought. I expect you to review the evidence. She opened the folder and began distributing copies of documents she'd prepared with Julian the night before. These are my performance reviews for the past 18 months, including detailed feedback from every project supervisor I've worked with. You'll note that my ratings have been consistently excellent, well before Mr. Atwood and I developed a personal relationship. Margaret Thornton glanced at the papers dismissively. Performance reviews can be influenced. By whom? Amara asked. Mr. Atwood doesn't write my performance reviews. My direct supervisors do. People like Sarah Jenkins in project management, Tom Mueller in client relations, and Lisa Park in strategic planning. Are you suggesting they were all compromised? These are the innovation proposals I've submitted over the past year, she continued, distributing another set of documents. The automated reporting system that saved the company $200,000 in administrative costs, the client communication protocol that increased satisfaction scores by 23%, the project timeline optimization that's now used company-wide, all developed and implemented before October 7th. The room grew quieter as board members actually began reading the documents. This is the complete timeline of my involvement in the Henderson, Morrison, and Patterson projects, Amara said, her confidence growing. You'll see that my initial assignments came through standard channels based on availability and skill set matching. Mr. Atwood's approval was required because of budget implications, not because he had any personal interest in my career. Julian spoke for the first time since confirming their relationship. If I may, I'd like to add some context. Brad Cooper nodded. Ms. Ellison has been an exceptional employee since her first day at this company. Her work ethic, innovation, and problem-solving abilities are unmatched. Any executive in this room would have made the same personnel decisions I made. His voice carried absolute conviction. The only difference is that I was fortunate enough to recognize her worth as a person as well as a professional. That's quite romantic, Patricia Rodriguez said dryly, but it doesn't change the appearance of impropriety. You're right, Amara said, surprising everyone. It doesn't. And if this company values appearance over substance, then perhaps I'm not the right fit after all. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. But before you make that decision, she continued, I want you to consider something. In 3 weeks of knowing about our relationship, has my work quality declined? Have I missed deadlines, made errors, or failed to deliver results? Because if the answer is yes, then by all means question my professionalism. If the answer is no, then perhaps you should question your assumptions instead. Margaret Thornton's expression had shifted from triumph to uncertainty. James Liu was studying the innovation proposals with genuine interest. Robert Kim was reading through her performance reviews with growing surprise. Brad Cooper was the first to speak. These results are impressive. They're exceptional, James Liu corrected, looking up from the documents. Ms. Ellison, I wasn't aware of the scope of your contributions to company efficiency. Because I don't promote my own work, Amara replied. I believe results should speak for themselves. Patricia Rodriguez set down her papers with a sigh. I'll admit, this paints a different picture than what I was expecting. Margaret Thornton remained silent, but her hostility had visibly deflated. Brad Cooper looked around the table, then back at Julian and Amara. I think we need a moment to discuss this privately. Would you mind stepping outside? In the hallway, Julian and Amara stood by the windows overlooking Elliott Bay, the morning sun turning the water into liquid gold. You were magnificent in there, Julian said quietly. I was terrified in there, Amara admitted, but I meant every word. Even the part about leaving if they value appearance over substance? Especially that part. She turned to face him. I won't work somewhere that doesn't respect what I bring to the table. Not even for you. Julian's smile was proud, radiant. That's why I love you. You don't need anyone to fight your battles because you're perfectly capable of winning them yourself. 20 minutes later, they were called back into the conference room. The atmosphere had shifted, less antagonistic, more professional. Brad Cooper stood as they entered. After reviewing the documentation you provided and discussing the situation, the board has reached a decision. Amara held her breath. Ms. Ellison, your professional contributions to this company are undeniable. Your work has consistently exceeded expectations, and your innovations have provided measurable value to our operations. The timing of your relationship with Mr. Atwood, while personally inconvenient, doesn't appear to have influenced the professional decisions that were made prior to its beginning. Relief flooded through her, but Brad wasn't finished. However, going forward, we need to establish clear protocols to avoid any appearance of impropriety. We're implementing a policy requiring disclosure of any romantic relationships between executives and direct reports, with mandatory HR oversight of any personnel decisions involving those individuals. That's completely reasonable, Julian agreed. Additionally, Margaret Thornton spoke up, we'd like to offer Ms. Ellison a promotion to Senior Strategic Coordinator with a corresponding salary adjustment. Your innovations deserve proper recognition. Amara blinked in surprise. Thank you. I accept. As they filed out of the conference room, Patricia Rodriguez approached Amara privately. I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on outdated stereotypes. Your presentation today was exemplary. Thank you, Amara replied graciously. I hope I've proven that competence and personal happiness aren't mutually exclusive. Later that evening, Julian and Amara stood on his penthouse balcony, Seattle's lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. The ordeal was over, their relationship was public, And somehow, miraculously, they'd both emerged stronger. "So," Julian said, pulling her closer against the October chill, "how does it feel to be Senior Strategic Coordinator Amara Ellison?" "Like the beginning of something incredible," she replied, tilting her face up to meet his kiss. As their lips met, as the city sparkled around them, as their future unfolded like a promise, one thing became perfectly clear. Some risks are worth everything, especially when you're brave enough to take them together. And they lived not just happily, but authentically. Two hearts that had found their perfect match in a world that finally understood their worth. 2 years later, some love stories don't end. They transform into something even more beautiful. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office on the 46th floor, casting everything in warm gold. Amara Atwood, the name still sent a thrill through her after 6 months of marriage, stood at those windows, watching Seattle wake up below. The city looked different from up here, broader, full of possibility. "Mrs. Atwood?" David's voice carried from the doorway, still tinged with the amazement he felt every time he used her new title. "The Henderson Group is here for the 10 o'clock. "Thank you, David. Give me 5 minutes and send them in." As Director of Strategic Innovation, Amara had her own corner office now, her own team, her own vision for Nexus Digital's future. The journey from administrative coordinator to C-suite executive had been meteoric but earned. Every promotion, every achievement, every breakthrough documented and deserved. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "How's my brilliant wife feeling about her first major acquisition meeting?" She typed back, confident. "The Henderson Group has no idea what they're about to agree to. That's my girl. Dinner at Romano's tonight to celebrate. Only if you promise not to accidentally run into us while we're eating. I make no such promises. I like showing off my wife." Amara laughed, remembering how different their dynamic had been 2 years ago. Now Julian treated her as his equal in business and his partner in life. No protection needed, just mutual respect and shared dreams. The Henderson meeting went exactly as she'd predicted. By noon, Nexus Digital had secured the largest tech partnership in company history, with Amara leading the integration team. "Exceptional work," Margaret Thornton said, as the Henderson executives filed out. The board member who'd once questioned Amara's qualifications now sought her opinion on every major strategic decision. "You've outdone yourself again." "Thank you, Margaret. I'm excited about the possibilities this opens up for our expansion." As the afternoon wore on, Amara found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The scared young woman who'd confessed her inexperience in an elevator seemed like a different person now. That woman had been brave enough to speak her truth. This woman was brave enough to reshape entire industries. At 5:30, she gathered her things and headed toward Julian's office, now just down the hall from her own. She found him exactly where she expected, standing at his windows, hands in his pockets, watching the city he'd helped build. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, slipping her arms around his waist from behind. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Julian replied, leaning back into her embrace. 2 years ago, you walking into my office was the highlight of my day because I got to pretend we were just colleagues. And now? Now you walking into my office is the highlight of my day because you're my equal, my partner, and somehow, miraculously, my wife." Amara pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "Speaking of partnerships, I have some news." Julian turned in her arms, eyebrows raised. "Good news or great news? Life-changing news?" Something in her tone made Julian go very still. "Amara, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a gift. Julian's expression cycled through surprise, joy, awe, and back to joy again. "Are you sure?" "Dr. Martinez confirmed it this morning. I'm 8 weeks along." Amara's smile was radiant. "Apparently our honeymoon in Tuscany was even more successful than we thought." Julian lifted her off her feet, spinning her around his office while she laughed. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you so much, it still takes my breath away." "I love you too, even when you're being ridiculously emotional in your office." "Our offices," Julian corrected, gesturing toward the wall that separated their executive suites. "This baby is going to grow up thinking corner offices and board meetings are normal. God help us all," Amara laughed. That evening, they sat on the same balcony where they'd celebrated their board meeting victory, sharing a bottle of sparkling cider and watching ferries glide across the Sound. The Seattle skyline glittered around them, familiar now. Home. "Can you imagine telling our child about how we met?" Amara mused, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Mommy confessed something very personal to Daddy in an elevator, and he completely lost his mind. I prefer to think of it as finding my mind, Julian said, his own hand covering hers. Everything before you was just existing. This is living. Even the board meeting drama, the gossip, the sleepless nights worrying about corporate policies, especially those parts. They proved we were strong enough to handle anything together. Amara was quiet for a moment, thinking about the young woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. Do you think she would have believed it? 26-year-old me? If someone had told her she'd be sitting here as your wife, carrying your child, running her own division? I think 26-year-old you was brave enough to fall in love with her boss, despite every logical reason not to, Julian said softly. So yes, I think she would have believed in the impossible. And 35-year-old you? If someone had told you that your carefully controlled life was about to be turned upside down by a woman in a blue dress, Julian's smile was tender, remembering. 35-year-old me would have run for the hills. But 37-year-old me knows that the best things in life are the ones that terrify you into becoming who you were always meant to be. As night fell over Seattle, as the city lights began to twinkle like promises, Amara rested her head on Julian's shoulder and felt the profound contentment that came with finding your place in the world. She thought about the elevator where it all began, about the courage it had taken to speak her truth to a man who could have dismissed her without a second thought. She thought about the blue dress that had started everything, about stolen moments in conference rooms, about the night she'd first said, "I love you," and meant it with every fiber of her being. Most of all, she thought about the future, their child growing up in a world where love didn't require choosing between happiness and success, where partnerships meant equals supporting each other's dreams, where someone's past didn't limit their potential. Julian. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, for choosing me, for proving that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. Julian pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Thank you for being brave enough to let me love you. And as Seattle slept around them, as their future unfolded like a map to undiscovered countries, two souls who had found their perfect match settled into the quiet certainty that some love stories don't just have happy endings, they have extraordinary beginnings, disguised as forever. In a city built on dreams and innovation, Amara and Julian Atwood had created something that would outlast any corporate empire, a love that transformed not just their own lives, but everyone lucky enough to witness what happened when two hearts decided to be brave enough to build something beautiful together. The end. What would you have done in her place? Would you have been brave enough to speak your truth in that elevator? Share your thoughts. Your participation means everything to us. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.